Great to be here this morning. It's a real pleasure to speak to you about how new media is changing politics. It's a subject that I care about personally, but it's also a subject that throughout the 2008 presidential campaign I actually lived through. I'd like to speak to you today less as a United States ambassador and more as a web user. I'm sure that some of the people here think the people my age are kind of fossils. I was around even before Al Gore fathered the internet, which actually there's quite a bit of truth to the fact that he was the father of it. But I admit that my first browser goes back to CompuServe and Prodigy and PC Link and other things that no longer exist. As Julie mentioned, I did work on the Obama campaign, including co-chairing the California campaign. And so it's mostly based on those experiences that I want to share with you some thoughts about how President Obama embraced the new media platforms during the 2008 presidential elections and some of the things that we learned. First, let's start with how the Obama campaign got into new media. There's this old saying that necessity is the mother of invention. The reason that the Obama campaign built its strategy around the web was honestly that we didn't have any other choice. President Obama tried to go back to late 2006, the time he decided to run, but people didn't think he stood much of a chance of winning the nomination at that time. He had enormous public appeal as a senator, and he was drawing large crowds all over the country wherever he spoke, but he didn't have any of the basics that you need in order to win an election. He didn't have money, he didn't have endorsements, he didn't have name recognition, and he didn't have consultants, which are the keys. He was running against then Senator Hillary Clinton, who had been a household name for over 2 decades. She had helped create the most effective fundraising machine in Democratic politics for the last 50 years, with all the big Democratic donors. She'd locked up virtually all of the major endorsements, since virtually every successful Democratic politician knew the Clintons, and most of them owed them a favor. She was the best known Democratic politician in America. And she'd already hired all the most sought-after Democratic consultants. Barack Obama, by contrast, had no national fundraising base. He had been relatively unknown until 4 years earlier. He'd only served 2 years in the Senate, and so he wasn't owed any favors by other national politicians. Most strategists, if they knew his name, thought it was a liability, Barack Hussein Obama. And since many of the best strategists were taken, he had to rely on people like me to help the campaign. So obviously we're in desperate circumstances. Now, both the Australians and Americans, I think we share a love of the underdog, which is why right now with the grand finals coming up, the Saints and the Magpies are both trying to spin how long it's been since they've won a grand final. We're the underdog because they want people to cheer for them. But in reality, underdogs usually stay under. To use an example from Major League Baseball, people in 49 of the 50 states cheer against the New York Yankees. And yet the Yankees have won 27 World Series. And the reason is, we may cheer for the underdog, but the odds are that if the underdogs are playing the same game the same way against the champion, they usually don't win. So President Obama had to do something different. He needed to be creative and not rely on the same playbook that candidates had been using in primary after primary. For example, we realized that he didn't have support of the establishment of people with really big money. He's never going to find 60 people who are going to immediately commit to raise $1 million for him, which is what other candidates had already accomplished. So instead, he needed to flip that figure. He needed to find 1 million people who would pledge $60 each. And if we could just find 1 million regular people who would give $5 a month for a year, we could be competitive. Now, the problem was that although lots of other people had the same idea before, it had never worked. No one had been able to do it. Likewise, he couldn't get influential politicians or political leaders to endorse him, so instead he needed to find a different kind of opinion leader. You know, the person in your school, the person in your office, the person at your church, who other people trust and who they listen to. The local opinion leader. And he had to find them and let them hear his story. As for his name recognition, or perceived negative associations with his name, he needed to make it familiar. He needed to get the name out there, big and bold and fun and fast, so that people were used to saying Barack Obama, enjoyed saying Barack Obama, could start to own it, you know, Barack and rollers and, you know, Barack the vote and, you know, Obama mamas and all the other things that people started developing over the course of the campaign. And finally, he needed consultants who, although they may not have played the game before, had special tools that would allow them to catch up quickly. So the fact was that the Obama campaign simply had no choice but to try something different to accomplish these things. And that turned out to be a tremendous advantage in a couple of ways, although none of us involved in the campaign actually realized it at the time. For one thing, the fact that we had these long odds meant that we were always underestimated, and so no one cared too much about what we were doing or tried to copy us. The competition, you know, although they were fully staffed and they were very skilled with extremely intelligent political professionals, they were relying on the same media strategy that had been successful for President Clinton 15 years earlier. They all looked at email as if it were still the best available technology. And some of them didn't go that far. Senator McCain, for example, was asked in the Republican candidates debate whether, you know, he used a Mac or a PC. And he said, I don't use either. My wife has one, but I wouldn't know how to turn it on. So, you know, they were operating in a different approach to technology. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that no other campaign in 2008 used social media. In fact, every one of them used it in one way or another. Because at that point, yeah, the platforms were common enough that every campaign realized that there was some potential there. And Joe Trippi, who was with the Edwards campaign, had helped to pioneer using new media. But while most of them saw social networks as a new means to reach some younger voters, it was mostly a footnote for them. The Obama campaign made it the core of our strategy. You know, just as John Kennedy had realized that TV, which had been viewed as a medium for entertainment, not for politics, back in the 1960s, could actually change politics, Barack Obama saw the same thing. So the moment for this media had arrived, but there was only one campaign that was prepared to go all in and bet on it as the core of our strategy. So what was strategy? You know, trying to summarize a big, complex effort like this is tough, but it came down to one insight. The president saw that all the new media tools at our disposal during the campaign, whether we're talking about Facebook or Twitter or, you know, SMS, Flickr, MySpace, YouTube, our website, which was My Barack Obama. He thought about them from the vantage point of a community organizer, rather than as a traditional political campaigner. He saw them as ways for his supporters to mobilize more supporters, rather than simply a medium for getting out a message or for receiving donations. Community organizers believe in face-to-face conversation because they know that most people need some kind of personal contact, some personal outreach in order to become passionate about an issue. Now, although initially this meant going door to door, later they learned that you could reach a lot more people in a personal way by phone banking or phone trees. To President Obama, social networking was just simply the next great advance in this. You know, a chance to have a personal contact, one-on-one, with all of your friends, and for them instantaneously to become phone bankers themselves effectively and reach out to all their friends. You know, people went to BarackObama.com not just to watch a video from the campaign or to read some reformatted press release or to send a donation, but actually to connect with others. It was a space to meet other people who cared about the issues of the campaign the way you did. You could exchange ideas, you could share videos, you could shop for Obama gear, enlist others to contribute, create your own profile page. Now, while the other campaigns seemed to see the computer as sort of a fancy mailbox or a television set, Obama saw it as a community. So the field operation, from the very beginning, set about deploying community building tools in the virtual world, just as you would if you were trying to build a grassroots campaign in the offline world. And they understood that it wasn't just about raising money or sending a message. It was giving every individual in this community the ability to have a personal stake in the race, to help shape a brand, to break down social barriers. And the numbers tell the story of the success of this. More than 2 million profiles were created on mybarackobama.com. There are 200,000 offline events that were planned. Over 400,000 blog posts were written. Over 3 million calls were made in the final 4 days of the campaign alone using MyBO's virtual phone banking platform. And this is just on MyBO. This is what we created. We had 5 million supporters in other SOCNets and maintained a profile in, I think, 15 online communities, including Facebook. In Facebook, I think we had 3.2 million supporters. By doing this, we built, I think we had 13 million email addresses. I'll give you some context for that. 4 years earlier, when John Kerry was the Democratic nominee for president, at the end of the campaign, he had 3 million email addresses. We started at zero and got 13 million over the course of a year. And ultimately, it translated into financial support. We had 3 million donors, made 6.5 million donations online, adding up to more than $500 million. Remember at the very beginning, we were sitting around the room penciling it all out. Boy, if we could get $5 from 1 million people, we could raise 60 million. Raised 600 million using social networking. Now, I think some people may draw the wrong conclusions from this success. So let me just offer a few thoughts. First, new medium is not some magic pudding. It doesn't produce these sorts of results if the content isn't there. It's clearly not enough to simply use the technology. I have a Facebook page, check. Yes, we've been tweeting 5 times a day. Yep, we're doing that. Got a video up. Got a blog statement. We posted something on YouTube. None of this would have mattered if the public hadn't felt as if they were participating in a real, genuine conversation. And that's the trap that I think a lot of people fall into when they think about the power of this technology. They assume that the content that might fail in the offline world will magically succeed in social media, and it just doesn't. If I have one insight that I hope you'll take away, it's that new media shouldn't be thought of as creating a new method of communicating. Its real power is in finally giving political leaders the ability to communicate through media the same way that they communicate in person. Think of it this way. Imagine you go to a political event. This is generally your experience. You arrive at someone's house. You get there early, look for the snacks. And then there are some other people there. You mingle with them for a while, compare notes, talk about the candidate, meet some new people who support the candidate. Then at some point, someone that you all know stands up and gives a speech about why you should support this candidate and why he needs you to go out and reach out to your friends to support him or her as well. Maybe you see a video. Then the candidate comes out, gives a speech. Maybe there are 1 or 2 questions and answers, but you don't get to ask the question, and then there's a short rope line. A few people get to shake hands, but then the candidate's gone, and you didn't have a direct contact with them. Most of your experience is the experience of the community that you're having in the room. You talk to people afterward, you make a donation, you buy a baseball cap, you talk about your plans for the next iteration, what you're going to do, and then you go home. That entire set of experiences is what happened on myBarackObama.com. You'd go in there, you'd communicate with friends who agreed with what you thought. You'd see a blog post that you'd share about someone endorsing. Here's a good reason to give support. You'd reach out to your friends. You'd make plans for how you're going to do something else. Maybe you'd see a video from the candidate. Maybe you would be able to join 1 or 2 question and answer periods for a short period of time. And you'd click online. Maybe you make a donation, buy some Obama gear, and then log off. You had the experience just in the online world. The reason it worked is because it didn't transform the experience of supporting a candidate at an event. It reflected it. It mimicked the same experience. And its genius was in providing new means for human beings to communicate the way we're comfortable communicating. So for this reason, my guess is that the most successful platforms of the future, I know Julie had posed the question, what's it going to look like in the future, will be those that take this concept to the next level, which most naturally reflect the way human beings like to communicate. For example, the way we reach out to close friends is different from the way we reach out to work colleagues or relatives or social friends. And so platforms that give us that ability to nuance our relationships and to communicate in one way and another way with different groups without them being aware that you're treating them differently and that they fall into this bucket as opposed to that one. That will be a great challenge for social media. But people who nail that will be the most successful platforms. I think a second insight about social networks is this. Like a society, they're organic. And to some extent, they're just outside your control. A key aspect of the success of the Obama campaign's use of new media was understanding that in a social network, just like in any social group, it's futile to think that you can control everyone else's actions. Most of the other campaigns looked at this as a way to collect email addresses and mobile numbers because that was a one-way communication that they could control. We get your number, we access you when we want to access you, and we allow you to access us for limited purposes. They were nervous about going any further and giving people a platform that was linked to their name because, correctly, they assumed some people might do some embarrassing things, and that could be dangerous for them. Senator Obama at the time, now President Obama, said if we're going to go this way, we've got to loosen the reins. We've got to trust people. And that was based on his own experience, again, in the offline world as a community organizer. He had faith that if people are trusted, they will be themselves wherever they are, offline or online. They won't be any better or worse than they were offline. And just so, since you can't control what they're going to say to people offline, don't try and control what they do online. It seemed like huge risk at the time. At the time, people thought we were crazy. But in hindsight, it was just common sense. If people act like jerks online, others are going to cut them off. But if they're interesting and they're kind, they're going to attract more contacts. The person that I think about is will.i.am. Do you remember the Yes We Can video? Was that viral down in Australia the way it was in the United States? Yeah, well, that idea didn't come from the campaign. It came from Will personally. Yeah, he'd been inspired by the New Hampshire speech, and he called his friends, and he recorded it, and he tried to distribute it through his record label. And they were like, we don't know what to do with this thing. You know, it's too political. It's not really a song. It's not getting to an album. It's kind of cool, but yeah, we don't. Yeah, like, what do we do? And so he said, well, you know, I'll just throw it up on YouTube and see what happens. That was it. I mean, that literally was a pivot point in the campaign. You know, we didn't know it was going to happen on Super Tuesday, and that video came out. And we're like, there is a God, you know. But you know, he didn't check with the campaign because he felt empowered by the way the campaign operated. He felt empowered to just let his talent be its own engine. And these things just tend to snowball. And after that, we started taking all sorts of risks, like, you know, why don't we have the president SMS text the, you know, who he's going to pick for vice president, the announcement of Joe Biden. And, you know, not everything worked out perfectly, you know. I'm not sure that, you know, Obama Girls' song, I've Got a Crush on Obama, was all that helpful to the campaign. But things like the Biden announcement, it worked. There were a lot of people who were worried that the media would feel cut out as sort of the conduit of information. But there wasn't any backlash at all. I think the media's view was it freed them up to do the more interesting work instead of just being, you know, recording and conveying what someone else is saying. They got to focus on analyzing it and putting it in context. So I think what made some of our success possible was the appreciation that social networking, you can't control it, and you have to just accept that going into it. Finally, an online community, like a regular community, is built not on technology. It's a real community, so it's going to be built on trust, and it's going to be built on sincerity. In this way, it favors political leaders whose message is in line with their medium. For example, the Obama campaign's political message was about inclusion, it was about empowerment, it was about openness and transparency. One of the reasons why the online community was so coherent in his website was that the decision to join the community required some belief in those same values. And the use of new media complemented it, to complement and reinforce the message. The tremendous amount of user-generated content from blog posts and chat groups, videos, it all meshed with the campaign's emphasis on authenticity and openness in government. And it was an invitation to citizens to participate directly in their government. So now let me turn to some of the challenges, because that was the other thing that Julie tasked me with, was identifying challenges. There are some challenges with new media that haven't been solved. As I mentioned, the use of new media, it created a sense of personal investment by people who joined that community. An investment in that campaign that was really unprecedented. Now, if you think about teams that you've played on, plays that you've acted in, schools that you've attended, where you develop this family, this community, this tight bond, and then the season ends, or you have the last show, or you graduate. During the celebration, you all turn to each other and you say, we're never going to let this go, we're friends forever, we're going to see each other. But that doesn't happen. What tends to happen is a few people stay in touch for a while, but the sense of personal connection that energized you ends because you go off in different directions. And you've got a campaign that's energized hundreds of thousands of new people to become involved in politics for the first time, but it's impossible to maintain that heightened sense of connection after the campaign ends. And this points to a problem that we have yet to solve in terms of social media and politics. Social networking technology is a fantastic resource for campaigns on elections. But it's not clear how well it's going to work for governance. 6.5 million people, feel a sense of disappointment after the campaign ends. because that community's gone, and now they're part of a much bigger conversation. It's not just Obama supporters. Now he's the governor. Now he governs everything. He governs all 300 million Americans. And that's the community to which he's responding. And what expectations do they have as the people who helped get him into office? Think about it in the non-virtual world. Again, that's, I think, how we have to think about this. In the non-virtual world, most of the 6 million people who donated to the president are hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from the White House. They don't expect to see the president. They don't expect to speak with the president. They don't expect to speak with anyone who even works with the president. They may have issues that they'd like to have addressed, but they're not anticipating a one-on-one response with President Obama. And if the president were to make a simple gesture, say, well, we had 6.5 million people online. I just want to thank each of them personally. So we'll have them each come by the Oval Office, shake hands, take a picture with them. I actually plotted out how long it takes to do a picture and a handshake in the Oval Office. That's all he could do for 8 years, and he would still be about 1.5 million people short. So he can't do that. You can't physically do that in the real world. And yet in the virtual world, a lot of people feel that they have a closer connection. As an online Obama supporter, they should have a personal online Obama experience. And that is a challenge for us in terms of reframing expectations. I was saying earlier, I was being interviewed, and I said, when I was a professor, I used to get emails from students, and it used to be that we had office hours, and students would stand hesitantly in the hallway waiting for their chance during a 1-hour window to sit down and ask you their question. And so it had to be a really important question, and they had to work their schedule around it so they could be there. And a lot of people were reluctant to go and have office hours. With the advent of email, I started getting 50, 100 emails a night from students who say, I'm just reading this and it doesn't make sense to me. Can you explain it? It's a leveling out, it's elimination of barriers, and it's something that we are still trying to figure out how to handle. I think the second issue is how you keep the personal network away from the private network. I'll give a quick anecdote. Right after I was announced as the ambassador, I was working at the White House, and it was late night. I get home, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, which is sort of when you get home, and you don't have personal access to your email accounts in the White House. You can try, but it's so hard, and they make it as difficult as possible that after about 2 weeks, everyone just gives up on doing their personal emails at the White House. So I get home, and I had a few hundred emails I need to respond to, and I thought, I'll get up early and do it in the morning. I wake up in the morning, and I've got 500 more messages in my email, and I'm like, of all the days to get a virus. But it wasn't a virus, it was a friend request from Facebook. I had 500 new friends from Australia. And it was wonderful to get all that personal outreach from people that I'd never met. But it also created this problem at that moment. I already had my Facebook account with all my actual friends who I'd been accumulating over my lifetime, and I sort of shared information with them in a way which was more personal than I necessarily wanted to share with a bunch of people I'd never met before, and I didn't know, what their agenda might be. And it was going to be months before I was going to be confirmed by the Senate, if I ever was confirmed, which meant we couldn't create some sort of new, this is my official account. So I was really, stuck, and I was in a catch-22. What I wanted to do was tell everyone, look, I really wish I could friend you, but this wouldn't be a good idea for me right now, but I'll friend you in 3 months when I get an account. Because the only way I could send a message to all of them, friending them, and telling them I couldn't friend them, was to friend them first. And I think public figures, run into this issue quite a bit. If sock nets are going to resemble real life, once you're in office, they have to mimic a very different experience in election networks. what we expect political leaders to do in political life when they're governing is work. It includes spending a lot of time reading, discussing, debating, managing, casting votes, etc., and only devoting some defined, appropriate period of time to being out among the public for some direct exchanges with constituents. So again, we need to change expectations that simply because a forum's always open, public figures can't always be available in it and on it. The larger question is, how do we get all this energy harnessed and put it to use in a new socially networked government? I think the answer is we're still working on it. And that's the last question, which was the government element. Large institutional bureaucracies need to speak with one unified voice. And this is hard to make vibrant or interesting in the offline world. And so it's hard to make it any more satisfying in the online world. If you employ new media in a way that's not genuine, is overly controlled or contrived, your community is going to lose interest and tune you out. So we're still working out the borders and the boundaries, the strengths and the limitations of these new media, and how we can use them to connect with audiences and with our counterparts. If you go on to the, and then you've also got the cultural issues. I mean, something which works on whitehouse.gov that's very popular in Uruguay might not get a single hit in Germany. There's a great deal of nuance that has to be worked out when you're speaking to 300 million Americans and to all of the world, as opposed to when you're trying to animate a particular set of voters in one country. If you look at the whitehouse.gov website, I think it's good. They're doing all sorts of innovative things, a lot of video blogs. So, for example, instead of people just asking a question and going to frequently answered questions, people say, does the president need a passport when he travels? And they have a little video blog and say, actually, the president does need a passport, but no one ever checks it. But we have to, have it anyway. So here, I'll show you. And then they walk over into a room, and some guy opens a safe, and they take it out, and they say, here's his passport. And I'm the passport guy at the White House. Those sorts of things that kind of humanize the answer. They're doing some clever things, but it's different. And we're still, feeling our way. Look, ultimately, new media will not replace all other forms of communication. It will simply replace those to which it's a superior way of communicating. But the balance between different methods will change. And we'll need to look for ways to combine them. I still find face-to-face communication I've got a much better sense of who's bored in the room and who's still listening and who's looking for a good quote and everything else by just looking around the room at the table and getting a sense of your reactions. I think face-to-face communication is still the best way to engage with people. So I'm going to try and extend a hand across the divide now, which is I'm going to randomly invite someone who Twitters to our USA Embassy in Oz account to come visit my office in the embassy tomorrow at noon, and we'll do an interview together. 15 minutes, no holds barred, ask whatever you want. Thank you very much.